If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Brien Convery. Brien is a seasoned recruiting professional with experience across many industries. He's a TEDx speaker, an advocate for young professionals. In fact, he founded a podcast called Coffee with Convery as a platform for students and professionals to share their experiences, including school-to-work transitions and insights into the working world. Brien, we are so delighted to have you with us today, and we're looking forward to talking with you about recruiting and newer professionals. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about your career and what led you into this very specific space around talent acquisition with students?
Sure. Thanks, Arnette. And thank you for having me so much on this broadcast. It's exciting to be here and great to be a part of it. I often describe my journey as a career portfolio, not a career path, in that I've done multiple things throughout my career and really an off-roading experience where, I've done everything from consumer products, as you mentioned, various industries, buyer, marketing, HR. But I really found my talent after consulting and getting into HR in the talent acquisition recruitment space, and most specifically in the early to career space, where I feel there's a lot of opportunity to help young individuals think about mapping their futures and helping them think differently with all the static that is out there and all the information overload they hear. I really find it very rewarding to just connect with young people, understand their generation, which helps us too, and maybe help them in their future careers. So that's where my passion is, and I talk often about it. As you mentioned in a TEDx talk, I did that on networking a few years ago. It's just one of my, it's nice when your passion and your careers can marry up and join each other.
Yeah, I think that's such a fabulous passion because helping young people right out of college figure out what their passion and what their purpose should be is really a critical piece. So let's dig right into this element
Sure.
of campus recruiting. Over the years, what kind of shifts have you seen the way employers are viewing the recruitment of college students? And how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're seeing is it's on a global scale, right? We have international students coming to the US and Canada and other regions. It's evolved in the way that people are starting to realize that organizations, this is our future, right? As baby boomers age and the populations, age out and retire, the next generations are the ones that are going to be running these organizations. So there's no time like the present to jump on and to get acclimated with how to get yourself, your organization, and your people talking to young individuals to see what they can bring to the forefront of your industry, which will most likely be a great amount of innovation.
Now, are you seeing employers really start to focus on recruiting from the vast talent pool that's on campuses today?
It's mixed. I think the challenges in the ecosystem I've seen over the years working for large enterprises is there's an easier way to get on campus when you're a big brand, you're a big name, and the schools recognize that, right? You might have multiple jobs. So I think the landscape and the ecosystem sometimes is challenging, especially for small and medium businesses where they may have one HR person and a recruiter and trying to break through, how do I show up? How do I go to, more than 10 universities or colleges? How do I even get introduced to the career services folks? That landscape is quite, I think, personally, from my opinion, difficult to navigate. And sometimes it takes a bit of a roadmap. But once you get a few students in, you start having them be the advocates and ambassadors for your organizations. It can also spread like wildfire, both good and bad, their experiences working with you.
Yeah. So let's talk in particular about Gen Z and the insights that you've gained from working directly with them and even younger professionals. So what insights can you share with us?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I have a podcast. So I talk to a lot of young individuals, and now I'm even starting to talk to more students that are in high school, right? Considering those moves to post-secondary into their first jobs eventually. What I see with Gen Z and some of the with some of the younger folks is I feel they're like, every other generation where we're misunderstood by the previous generation, right? We've all gone through that experience. I'm sure you've had it with your parents saying, we didn't do it the way you did it, and onward throughout the generations. So I think just trying to encourage people to have an open mind. Yes, they're digital natives. They've grown up on cell phones and iPads and things their whole life, but there's much more to be seen there than just that. And I think if we start to dig into it, you'll find that they really have a passion for making a difference in the world. A lot of them have grown up with some of the tragedies we've seen in the last few years, and they want to make a difference. So I think that's where I've seen the conversation go to. I also think they think through things. I did have a conversation, an experiment I did with a few students to ask their impressions or opinions about office space and how it should be designed at a previous employer. The conversation was quite quiet in the room, and I was wondering what that was all about. What I did find, which was very interesting, was when we broke, a couple of the students followed me back to my office and said, that was a great session. Really enjoyed having the opportunity to be heard. But what we want to share with you is that we're the generation that listens and then responds. So I need time to digest what you were asking, and I'll be back in a couple of days or a couple hours to share my thoughts. Very, very interesting. I had not heard that before, and I wanted to share it with the audience because they outwardly expressed that these were some of the differences. They want to think about it. They want to respond meaningfully, and maybe not good on the spot delivery of communications.
Yeah. I kind of hear that with my kids today. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions that employers might have, and maybe some of them can't let go of it. Because I know, especially if we're from a boomer generation, maybe there's some things that we just can't let go of. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think some of the misconceptions or some of the things we can't let go of is we need to treat this population and these candidates different from experienced individuals, right? Often you'll see hiring managers and folks, and maybe even postings, you may have even seen it yourself, where they're looking for something that doesn't really exist in that group or that demographic. To express that you want someone in an entry-level job with 7 years experience, well, is that entry level? Right? You really need to think about your marketing materials and your catering to the audience because they are all over social, looking at job postings. And if it doesn't make a dent with them in what you're looking for, they don't feel they have it, they're not going to apply. So I think one of our misconceptions or one of our mistakes sometimes is not advertising these roles correctly to this demographic. And also being open to the words that I often use is let's hire for potential. Right? If you have those human skills and the abilities, and you've maybe done a co-op at school or you've done different things in your lived experiences, I've met students at a high school that speak 3 languages. That's significant. Share that, right? Like share that information. So I think if we could do better, it would be around how we think differently, how we hire for potential, and how we recognize this audience as our future leaders and help them along and maybe give a little leg up so that they can get their first start.
Yeah. So for hiring managers out there, if you had to really identify one element that they need to understand better about the new professionals, what would that be?
What I often say is seriously is like someone gave you a start at one point in your career, and think about that person and how it started, right? I'm sure you were not completely qualified for every single thing that was in that position, but think about that and then also humanize it, right? Think about your own maybe daughters, sons, niece, nephews, and think about how they're trying to get started in this world of everything going on and things costing much, affordability of housing, all the things that are happening. And so I think really my one point would be take it from a human's perspective and just really think about these youth as individuals that want to come and learn. And we may also learn from that.
Yeah. So if we go to the other side of the equation and say, what are the risks of hiring somebody right out of school? What are those that the employer faces?
Sure. And this is a really interesting question, Arnette. Like, I think it depends on the corporations and size of them as well. But some of the risks I sometimes hear is, well, what if they come, we train them and they leave in a year, or they leave in 2 years? Well, the reality is that we are going to have, and all the data out there says most of us will probably have 6, 7, 8 careers in a lifetime. So the reality is that they are going to possibly leave, but what are you going to do to retain them? What's the welcome at to show them once they arrive, the talent management and the investment you're going to make in their talent and their development to want to stay? So I think, the risk can be mitigated by having talent acquisition, talent management, and managers in the business really owning and helping develop these younger people with their careers, providing networking opportunities, providing the ability for them to learn on the job and other things. And again, it's slightly different than if you had an experienced person coming in and hitting the ground running. But I think the risks are low. I think, when you look at the real whole system and the whole situation, I think the risks are really low. And I think, if they do leave in 2 years, then treat that as well as you did when they hired, because they're going to be an ambassador of your company. They might be a client of yours. They might be, part of that ecosystem to refer friends, and treat them as alumni.
Yeah, that's great advice. And so I know that covers the risk side of it, but I know there's got to be some unique benefits of hiring professionals out, from a campus environment. What are those?
100%. And I've been in this space for almost 15 years now, specifically on campuses across the US and Canada. And I've seen firsthand the benefits. And the benefits are the eagerness, the innovation, the mindfulness, the empathy, all the things that we're trying to look and bring to the office now, or to the trades or whatever the field may be. The benefits of hiring someone now is that you can get them in, have them work with you and have them grow with the organization and help you identify also, maybe if you're also in client services, how you can appeal to their generation and maybe think differently about some of your services, your products. What's really interesting, Arnette, is when people have these students in their workplace, think of them as a focus group, right? They're there working, but why not grab a couple students together and have some conversations about some of the problems you're trying to solve, some real world problems, and actually take that opportunity to have them be part of sharing some of that experience.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've seen employers doing good things and bad things when it comes to recruiting from campuses. Can you highlight a few of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll start with the good. I think if you have like a great sort of transition from orientation, from hiring them on the schools to starting on their first day, that's important. And one of the things I'd recommend to people as they think about it, there's typically a big gap between you interview them in the fall, they start in May, maybe as an example. So how do you keep in contact with them? Maybe, reach out at the holidays, maybe see how they're doing. Let them know that you're still there, that there's still a job at the end of this time frame. So I call that pre-onboarding, but I think it has so much more impact and it shows that you really care about them being part of your organization. I think once they arrive in orientation to the whole company, people, maybe some buddy systems set up, some things that they can do outside of the day job, maybe think about 20% or 10% of the day that they can do other things like learn about another job at the company, or maybe job shadow a fellow student. So providing that student experience, I'll call it, while they're working is super important. Some of the bad things I've seen is, and a lot of times, especially where you have summer students starting in May and June, is everyone doesn't always think about the fact that you and I might have our family vacation in July, and now we're managing the student and we say, okay, we'll see you. We'll be back in 4 weeks. Well, that's over half of their summer. And if they're not going to have a direct supervisor or have someone there to supervise and help them and navigate, that's not going to be a great learning experience at all. So you really have to plan and understand the landscape for a young person and a student, whether it's from university or college, that they do need some sort of programming and help and direct understanding of deliverables and goals and things like that. And if you don't provide any of that, it's not going to be a great opportunity for the student, and they're not going to want to just sit there and sit at their desk and wait for work to come. And I have seen that as well, right? Where people think, oh, we're going to have all these things to do, and then it just goes awry.
Yeah. As we look out at the next year ahead, and if you could identify an area of how an employer might stand out from the pack, because frankly, that's what, I do believe a lot of the students might be looking for. Where's that employer that really shows us something? And what might you identify there?
This is a great question. And again, it goes back to my conversation with you about large enterprise, small and medium businesses. And I think one of the biggest challenges is we as human beings are programmed by brands and name recognition and places to work. And all that's good. I've worked at some major brands and names across globally across the country. And however, there are some great opportunities at small and medium businesses that just don't get the name recognition and the attraction. So if you fall into that category, what makes you special? What is something that you're going to deliver that would make that a great opportunity for a student? Maybe you have, a focus on an end-to-end sort of support system, and you really value equity, diversity, inclusion. And there's other things that you can make yourself stand out because maybe you're not one of those big label branded names. If you are one of those big label branded names, and I've heard this, please don't say this, well, they should want to work here, because that's not the right attitude to go into it. And if you think of that going through the whole way you're onboarding and hiring people, that's not a very friendly way to approach new people coming to your organization, okay? Because those days are kind of gone about the idea that they should want to work here. There's a lot of different options. There's a lot of things happening in the gig economy. Students are working in very differently than we have, hybrid, virtual, you name it. And so really, I think that's what I would say is if you're, depending on where you sit in that ecosystem of size of your employer, size as an employer, really think about what differentiates you from the best and try not to focus on the corporate speak too much, because we see like corporate speaks and also I would say stock images that are used on websites. Even we see through that, right? I'm not a student, but I see through that. And, show the real people, talk about what's going on, have testimonials from people that work there. That's the differentiator that these young people are looking for, because there's so much glossy looking, corporate speak. Think about a talent voice for your organization. What are you going to talk about to the talent? Yes, leverage that corporate, successes, but make it real and individualized for the individual considering working there.
Yeah. I know you've got some really credible experience working with employee resource groups.
Yep.
And you've worked on various groups. Why don't you explain a little bit about that particular category and talk about how employers can take advantage of that?
Yeah, great question. And I think, you'll sometimes hear them called employee resource groups or business resource groups with a B instead of an E. And essentially what it is enabling people at your organization to represent a group, a minority of individuals that may not have the visibility as much across the organization. So it enables the individuals who are employees to come together based on, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's their backgrounds, whether it's their culture, whether it's part of the LGBTQ plus community, whatever it may be, whether it's women in business. All these groups come together and they form an ability to actually have events, get to know each other, support each other. And so I've been a part of a few in my past. I think now too, the big thing is intersectionality between them, right? Yeah. Because we're not one dimensional. So it's important to understand that those overlap. But I think they can be a powerful resource for you. An expansion of HR, yes, but really an expansion of the business and really the values of the company. And that goes a long way in representing yourselves, and also gives you that ability to thrive at work.
Yeah. So another area that I found interesting that you have experience in is, this discussion around networking. I know you did a TEDx talk on networking itself. So tell us how that fits into this war for talent and how the young person is out there seeking opportunities.
Yes, I would say gone are the days of applying and hoping. It doesn't exist anymore, right? We used to call it apply and pray. Or we on the recruiting side called it post and pray, we get candidates, right? It's not just that anymore. So networking has really taken off in a different way in the last few years. It is also challenging for folks that come from other countries that don't necessarily rely on networking to meet people and get jobs. They rely on credentials and grades. So there's a whole bunch of individuals navigating this space that have comfort in it and that don't. But the point of the matter is that what really matters is who knows you. We always talked about who you know, but it's who knows you and how do you stand out from the competition and from other people that are applying for jobs. On average, you'll see about 220 applicants per job. I've seen higher, but if you're in that pool and a recruiter's got 6 seconds to look at your resume and maybe cover letter, that's not going to be the only way, but some people do get discovered that way. But it's really about, who did I meet at that event? Who stood out and came out after hours to talk to us? So I think it's really getting out beyond the resume and really getting yourself in a position where you can meet individuals. There's so many ways to do it. I even look on Eventbrite as a tool once in a while of what's happening in meetups, free meetups, and go and meet some people. And that could lead to an opportunity, not necessarily a job, but an opportunity. So there's lots of ways you can think about networking, even at a barbecue, right? We meet people at barbecues. What do we usually talk about? What do you do? Not who we are. We should talk more about who we are, but what do you do? So I think that's another great way, right? Where you can think about networking beyond just the traditional ways of meeting people.
Thanks so much. Brien, before we sign off today, I want to ask you a question that I ask every guest. S2 Verify is a pre-employment background screening company. So if S2 Verify were to conduct a background on you, would there be any surprises?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm a pretty straightforward guy, and I think you would. I've been through quite a bit of background checks. I've worked for the public sector and Homeland Security and others, so I've been through the drills in some of my consulting ways. But I think, what you'd find is honestly consistency and passion and really loving what I do. And I think bringing forth, the challenges and looking at those as opportunities. But no, I don't think you'd find anything too terribly worrisome. I'm try to be an upworth person, and yeah.
Well, that's exactly what I've discovered today. So, Brien, thank you so much for joining. Tell our listening audience where they can follow you, learn more about what you're doing, and maybe reach out if they have an opportunity or have a question.
Sure, absolutely. So as you can see here, maybe on the screen, it's Brien with an E, Brien Convery. So I have a website, brienconvery.com. It encapsulates everything I've been doing on public speaking forums like today, as well as my podcast, Coffee with Convery, that's on Spotify, which was developed during COVID for students by the students. And it's just giving them a voice and talking about those challenges we've discussed. So you can find me at brienconvery.com. And by all means, I'm on LinkedIn. I warn you, if you do connect with me on LinkedIn, you're going to see me in your feed quite a bit. But hopefully you find that information valuable and help you as a job seeker or an employer looking to learn more about the talent acquisition and recruitment field.
Great. Thank you so much. So right now, I'd like to take a minute with Bill and Jim, my partners at S2 Verify. Now, in that process that CRAs have to follow, are there any follow-up responsibilities for a CRA once they've sent the 613 letter out?
No, once we send, it's basically a notification. So it's basically separate from, as we're going to talk about, pre-adverse and adverse action. And so pre-adverse and adverse action are really an employment or employer responsibility. This is a responsibility of the 613, is a responsibility of the CRA, just to notify them that there has been a record found in a public, as Jim says, public in a domain.
So the great news for clients is this is not a responsibility they have to undertake as long as they've selected S2 Verify or another company that has really a strong adherence to compliance requirements. The CRA will handle all of the issues for them regarding the 613. Now, let's assume that the information that we've identified on a candidate and we've notified them that we've found information. And as we further digest the information and validate the information, and we find criminal convictions that fall within an area where an employee could be excluded, that requires another letter. Is that correct, Jim, that is what would be referred to as an adverse action letter?
So the process of both finding and reporting a record which could potentially impact the individual's ability to garner employment or gain the job they're applying for, broken into two categories. There's a pre-adverse letter, and then there's an adverse letter, pre-adverse action, adverse action letter. Primarily, the responsibility of those letters falls on the employer. They're obviously inside of the S2Verify system, fully integrated. Clients have full access to them, et cetera. On occasion, we are asked to handle that for an employer on their behalf. And I want to explain what that really means with the advent of ban the box. But functionally, Arnette, to your question, when an employer receives a background report back, and they look at the report and they see a criminal record that they believe may not, but could have an impact on that individual's ability to be placed in the position for which they've applied, that's the trigger for a pre-adverse. It's simply telling a candidate, hey, we did this background and we discovered this record. We're giving you a chance to respond to the CRA. If you don't think it's accurate, or if you think there's another issue with that report or that record, this is your window to do that. And under FCRA, they get like a 5-day window to make contact with us. Now, do they or don't they? Some do, most don't. After the 5-day window, if the employer mentally goes, hey, you know what? We're okay with that. It was a misdemeanor. We're going to go ahead and we're going to let John or Mark or Mary go to work. Nothing else has to be done. Okay, because the pre-adverse was simply a heads up. It wasn't, my term here, a declination or denial. However, in that 5-day window, if the employer decides we're not hiring this individual, that triggers the adverse action letter. Then the adverse action letter then tells the consumer or the candidate really similar language to the pre-adverse, except this one says you're not getting the job. And again, if you disagree, you can reach out to S2Verify or whomever the CRA is to discuss that background. So it's a very rigid process. First one goes, 5 days later, you're hiring the person, nothing happens. 5 days later, you're not. The second letter must go. Now, I mentioned the ban the box challenge that's causing employers to have to think differently. Many states, but I think right now there's probably, Massachusetts, Maryland, Oregon, PA, Texas, Washington, Illinois, California, New York, Florida, to name a few, okay, have very specific language that now either the state and sometimes it's a jurisdiction. So New York City, as in the boroughs, have specific language that doesn't apply outside to the remainder of New York State. But what's important about it is, and this will help explain a little bit why I mentioned employers asking us to handle these letters. The letters now require that an employer be very specific. So when they send the pre-adverse letter, there's language in there, and within our system, it's customizable totally, that the employer has to specifically list the reason, the crime that is been found that's causing the individual not to be considered for the job. And then when the adverse letter goes, the same exact language has to be put back in there. So one of the things that we had to look carefully at to assist an employer, that's a one-on-one relationship. Because when we go to produce the letter off of the client's notification to send it, we have to know what it is we're putting in there. Which crime are you specifically referring to? Because the letter must address it. So it's made the process of pre-adverse and adverse in those states I mentioned and others considering it much more detailed, much more rigid, and more importantly, from a regulation standpoint, employers must adhere to it.
Bill, I know you were going to add some
Yes.
additional.
The time between the pre-adverse and the adverse is 5 business days. So it doesn't include weekends, holidays, et cetera. It's got to be 5 business days before you can send out the adverse or when you send out the pre-adverse. So it's very important because there was some litigation previously a couple of years, several years ago about that. So.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our exploration of topics critical to success in HR. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, and Canada for that matter, because dreams only work if we do. Thanks so much, Brien. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you want to stay abreast of HR recruiting and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.